Welcome back, everyone. We're going to do another tech talk today on a pretty fun topic. And I'm super excited because we have someone on the channel as a guest speaker that we should have had on a long time ago. So Scott Grunemeyer, I call him Gru. So that's what I'll refer to him as. Scott, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. I'm Scott Grunemeyer, aka the Gru. I work at Microsoft. I'm a principal technical specialist, and I work in our state and local government business. But I have worked extensively with all of our partners around AVS and internally with our Azure VMware product group quite a bit.
And like I said, it's way overdue. I mean, you've been doing AVS before most people have been doing AVS. I mean, what year did you start like really picking this up? I mean, it was
Well,
before I even started.
so I was at the first meeting where it was still super secret that we were going to do VMware at Microsoft to kind of get an introduction and figure out how we were going to go to market with that. So I've been doing AVS since before AVS was AVS. Um, and then so I've gone through all the iterations, all the ups and downs, the pros and cons, and I'm glad to be here today because I think we are on top of the market with the best solution out there.
Yeah. And I mean, even to the topic we're talking about today, the ecosystem has even grown substantially, which
Absolutely.
just comes with the maturity of the product. So it's super exciting. Glad you made the time to join us today and we can kind of walk through this. So maybe to start it off, I'll kind of a little bit of a Matt monologue, but touch on the most important thing for customers and partners to understand when it comes to disaster recovery for AVS. The simple fact is we can run the gamut. There is a wide ecosystem. We have a lot of partners that provide a different range of options for disaster recovery. And what's really important that could save customers and partners a lot of time is simply think through your requirements before we start having a discussion, right? Now, that's what for, yourself, Gru, and me, that's part of our job is to help you get to those requirements. And we understand you understand the range of options. But part of the challenge is a lot of people, when they start talking about DR, they're not even really sure what their RPOs and RTOs are. They haven't talked about that with their internal stakeholders for some time. And so this is a slide that I worked with actually a peer at Microsoft, Brittany, around trying to give a single slide to give an idea of the range of options and how your requirements can change that on top of your budget, can change what that solution is. So maybe, if enterprise DR is like at the bottom left being the most expensive solution, it's going to have the fastest RTO. And to be frank, a lot of these options have very similar RPOs. That's why it's not discussed here. And then you have like backup, which is going to be sort of the longest RTO, but also the cheapest option. So I don't know, Gru, do you have anything to
Yeah.
comment on?
Well, I mean, when you ask the business, you say, "Hey, what's an acceptable amount of downtime?" A lot of times they're going to say none, and then you say, "All right, well, how much data can we lose?" The answer again is typically comes back as none. Well, how much money are you willing to spend to achieve that? And the answer that also comes back is typically none. So, we have a disconnect typically between the business and reality with business continuity and disaster recovery. Because, like paying for insurance, it's hard to appreciate the value until you have to use it,
Mm-hmm.
right? DR, business continuity, and disaster recovery expenses feel expensive and useless until you have a disaster. When you have a disaster, then oh my gosh, are you thankful for it? Now, the really cool thing about the cloud and the options we have here, it's very easy to price out at different levels, so you can almost t-shirt size the business continuity and disaster recovery. And for most of our customers, it ends up being a mix between all of these products to get to
Mm-hmm.
that right level.
Yeah.
But then you can present back to your business specific options and costs for specific applications to figure out, where is their appetite for disaster recovery and business continuity. And again, having those discussions with actual recovery numbers with the business and actual costs makes it a lot easier for them to say, you know what, I think I'm here on the chart or here on the chart based off that cost and recovery time.
Yeah.
And so having all these options in the cloud is great because we can bring all those options to the customer and we're not restricted by, legacy hardware or legacy pieces that, may be more difficult on-prem than they are in the cloud.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to empathize with customers and partners to help our customers to build these DR solutions, I think that oftentimes they don't even know that there is this range of options. So like, that's what we want to communicate to them is we really can meet any RTO you're looking for, depending on what the budget and what the severity of the application or the SLA of the application requires. Right. So like, again, having that conversation around, what the true SLAs are for these applications helps us kind of drive specific solutions to like what you mentioned, which is usually a varying piece of this graph. Like it may not necessarily be at the very bottom left, and it may not be the very top right. It may be right in the middle or slightly, towards the bottom left or slightly towards the top right, completely dependent on what you require. Right. So,
and it's going to be per application, and that's why we can mix and match.
Yeah, totally. Right. But there are those customers that have been doing disaster recovery and have like what I would say a mature disaster recovery model with an actual physical other disaster recovery site. And those customers I'll kind of lob into sort of like the enterprise disaster recovery setups, meaning they have like for like infrastructure. Maybe touch on those type of customers and those types of solutions.
And this is the hardest thing to pull off on premises because that like for like becomes difficult when you're dealing with buying hardware, buying facilities, getting the networking going, and making sure you have that like for like compatibility across those sites. And then with on premises, I've had customers that set this up, but one of the crucial factors is how far apart are the data centers, right? If they're only 10 miles apart or 50 miles apart, that may not cover you. So in the case of, say, an electrical outage at one facility, you're going to be fine. But I've had customers where they've told me they're very confident in their disaster recovery position because the other facility was 50 miles apart. But guess what? Lo and behold, a giant, forest fire came through and ate both facilities, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's absolutely terrible and heartbreaking for those communities, but this stuff does happen. So being greater than 500 miles apart and having all that like for like is very difficult on premises. In the cloud, it's extremely simple. Mm-hmm. We can typically set up an environment like we have on the screen in 1 to 2 weeks, and then most importantly, test and validate it, right? One of the most important questions you can ask your IT is, hey, when's the last successful disaster recovery test you had? And were you able to recover everything within your RPO and RTO goals, right? And if the answer is no, you're spending all this money and it's like a lottery. Am I gonna win when it comes time for recovering from a disaster, or have I spent all this money for nothing?
Or even, I was able to recover, but I wasn't even able to recover in my RTO I thought I could do because I hadn't practiced it. I mean, this is, there are automated portions of disaster recovery, but a lot of it is also a game plan. Like, I mean, we're not going to dive into because there's not enough time in a tech talk, and I'm sure it could be in some how-to videos. But we can maintain IPs with overlapping networks and disconnected tier ones. We can change IPs through the automation tools, and you would just have to have some scripting or manual run books around changing DNS entries. These are all, plausibilities, but do require practice either way. So that's a great point. And, we're not just talking about Site Recovery Manager. Like we mentioned, these are basically, you can have an on-premise data center that's running VCF, and AVS is essentially a VCF architecture. So they are like for like, but they don't have to be on Site Recovery Manager. They could be on Jetstream or Zerto. And again, back to our earlier point around maturity of the product, vast ecosystem. It's one of the things I love about Microsoft and
Yeah,
VMware.
absolutely.
We're very mature software manufacturers, and we've worked with a lot of different players. But benefits and trade-offs, fastest RTOs, you will get like for like performance because you're matching everything core to core, gigabyte to gigabyte, and memory to memory gigabyte. Data is staged there. So it's all immediately available, right? That's what really drives the RTO. But of
Right.
course, the challenge with this, just like Guru was mentioning, is not just the bring up, but the cost, right? Like you are literally running two sites side by side, and so you have to, whatever you probably spent here, you're spending here, with some cost optimization you get with AVS being a managed service. So that kind of brings us to what's this pilot light scenario or kind of hybrid setup. And this is probably the one that unlocks a lot of capabilities for customers around getting the best of both worlds, right? Leveraging the capabilities of scale with the cloud while also maintaining speed with staged data. So a little bit of a complicated graph, but to simplify it, you have your on-prem infrastructure and you start, to Gru's point on the previous slide, you start choosing your applications. So like my most essential services, like your AD, DNS, DHCP, that just runs, right, in AVS. But then you have your tier one applications, the ones you expect to have, let's just say minutes to hours. The actual time will vary based on the number of VMs and how you implement the strategy. But you need minutes to hours on tier one applications. You use a DR management tool that could be Jetstream, Site Recovery Manager, or it could be or Zerto, right? Some sort of
Right.
BCDR tool. And then you basically run what are called recovery plans at Site Recovery Manager. Jetstream has a similar version, and so Zerto, where you plan out the recovery on the stage data in AVS. So that the tier one applications use a DR management tool, and they have the fastest RTOs because you've already planned out the actions that happen, and you have staged data on the vSAN data store in AVS. And then everything else, the tier two applications, you would actually back up through your backup management tool. And we have a robust set of backup partners. We actually have that on the next slide. But you use your backup tool to store it in a different data repository that's cheaper, right? And doesn't require the actual node types. One of the things I'll point out here is, this is like an environment that requires 6 hosts on-prem, but we're only doing the tier one application sitting on the persistent vSAN data store. So we only need about 3 nodes to meet that. And then everything else goes to the tier two backup management store through blob storage. And when an actual disaster were to happen, then I can scale the number of nodes to meet the tier two demand and then rehydrate that data into AVS to give you that pilot light scenario. So I started with a smaller amount of nodes, immediately recovered the tier one, and then grew into the tier two.
I mean, in that less than 30-minute time it takes to spin up new nodes is a lifesaver for a disaster and for your pocketbook as well, right? I mean, this pilot DR method is what we see most customers using, recover their tier one workloads immediately, and then over the next 24 or 48 hours using backup software to recover the rest.
Right. Totally. And then, usually what comes with that is you're going to have to go to your application owners, just like Gru said, and work with them to find out, and stakeholders and leadership at the end of the day of like, okay, if we were truly down, what is absolutely essential? Like, as an IT administrator, I've got to have the basic underlying services like Active Directory, DNS, all these other things. But from a business point of view, what are the absolutely critical applications I need within minutes to hours? And then, hours to days can be the tier two applications. And we've done testing. I've been engaged in some environments where they wanted to see the performance throughput of basically using backup and restoring into the AVS cluster. And this is all 25 gig, 100 gig backbone networking to restore from a good tier of blob storage is very, very fast, right? And so we are usually only looking at hours, but if you have a ton of data, it may be days. It just depends. on the architecture and how you deploy that. And then on the very, very far end of the ecosystem, or sorry, the continuum of disaster recovery, and we do have customers that do this. It just comes with a lot of trade-offs. Is you actually don't run any AVS infrastructure; you just put it in backup. That is a viable option. It is something you can do, but you're really looking at, I'll say days to weeks. Honestly, it's weeks to months.
Right.
Maybe, I mean, this is, what we do all the time, standing up AVS infrastructure. Like, what goes into standing up AVS infrastructure that could take that time? Networking, security. I mean, I don't know, give me some more, Gru. Like,
yeah, it's too much when you're in the middle of a disaster to build a whole landing zone, right?
Yeah.
It's just too much. You need to have it built out ahead of time. And this is our best practice that we give all of our customers. Build out the landing zone, have the minimum 3-node AVS stamp sitting there, replicate your backup store over to this secondary region so that you can restore it then, right? And again, it's going to be a mix typically with most customers. But if you want to have real recovery, you got to build out some level of infrastructure ahead of time, because in the middle of when your hair's on fire is not the time to put in quality thought about building.
Yeah, or your boss is breathing down your neck,
right.
like you're right there behind you, wanting to get this stuff up. It's just, it's not, it is possible, or I should say probable. But it in action, it's very stressful, and it will take days to weeks. So, like, again, if you communicate with those stakeholders that that's an acceptable SLA, then this is something you can consider. But at least game plan, go through the practice of standing up AVS infrastructure beforehand, because once you go through it, you understand what you have to be prepared for, which is, really goes for everything in disaster recovery is practicing it. You got to practice it.
Yeah, that is absolutely the most critical thing. And, the nice thing about the cloud is it's, we can do infrastructure as code, and it is eminently repeatable, right? So that practice really pays off, because we can, store these configurations as code and bring them back, really, very quickly to implement your validated architecture.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's exactly what I wanted to hit on in this video. Again, we're not diving too deep into the weeds on, recovery plans and protection groups and boot up orders and IP strategies, but mostly like just driving home that point of like, we have the gamut of options when it comes to AVS and disaster recovery because of Azure's infrastructure, and understanding how the RTOs really can play a role in deciding how we utilize different services in Azure to meet a BCDR plan.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, customers who have done the work, made the appropriate investments, and then had an opportunity to use it, they have been extremely thankful, because they kept their businesses running even when, the chips were down.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to think about with this is that, if you're doing a business continuity disaster recovery setup from on-prem to the cloud, a migration is just a disaster recovery that you don't recover from, right? You do the test, it's all working, you don't fail back, guess what? You've just migrated to the cloud successfully. So that always becomes an option to help out with migrations later down the road.
That's a great point, because I've actually had a couple customers, one when I first started very early on, that wanted to use Site Recovery Manager to fail over into AVS and then treat AVS as prod in their older infrastructure as DR, which I actually thought was the most robust way to do it. If you can get extended support, and depending on your on-site infrastructure life cycle, it was possible for them. They still had life left in that product. So again, like, that's another creative way of really using DR, I think, in the most effective way, because AVS is going to be new infrastructure for you. It'll have, the later processor or the newer processors, the newer systems, and the benefits of, really the enterprise grade fast speed networking Azure provides. is better than most people's on-prem environments. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, cool, Gru. Again, way too long and overdue to have you on one of these today. Thanks for jumping on and providing your insight,
My pleasure.
especially with your experience. We'll be doing some more videos in the future, guys. If you have any suggestions, like I said, leave a comment below. If you want to come up and do a tech talk on a specific topic, this is a community-oriented channel. Please reach out to me. So appreciate it, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.